I'm here today with Gil Borok, the CEO of Colliers, a global real estate services and investment company, which has passed 5 billion in annual revenue and employs a team of 24,000 people around the world and manages more than 100 billion in real estate assets. We're going to talk about his career, his views on the direction of commercial real estate, how he approaches company culture, and plenty of other topics on this episode. Gil, thanks so much for joining us on Road to CEO.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Will.
So let's start with Colliers. Did I describe the company correctly?
You did. You did. Maybe you didn't give us enough accolades, but you did describe it objectively
Okay.
in that we are a global real estate services provider. We do brokerage, property management, investment management, engineering services, run the whole gamut across the globe. You did a pretty good job.
Okay, good, good. So you became CEO of Colliers, if I'm not mistaken, in December 2019. Uh, is that correct?
Of the U.S. division,
Of the
yes.
U.S. division, correct, correct. Within about 4 months, the whole world shut down due to COVID-19, if I'm remembering things correctly. What was it like to be the CEO of a company like Colliers when people were being told to work from home, don't socialize, stay away from office buildings? What was that like?
You know, I don't remember because I've tried to erase it, right, 5 years later. But no, seriously, it was, in a sense, it was kind of a good thing to be a new CEO because, you just you had to deal with what you always, as CEO, you have to deal with what comes. And that was the first crisis, if you will, right? And it was a pretty big one in terms of, yes, it impacted the industry that we work in and day out. It impacted people's lives in terrible ways in terms of the deaths that we were experiencing. But, I've had this philosophy of, I've been through some tough times prior to COVID, the great financial crisis, 0809, when banks weren't lending. I was CFO of another public company. And, as much as when you think about it in the long term or the medium to long term, it's a little at that moment, it's a little scary, a little intimidating, like, oh my God, what if this doesn't reverse? When is this going to end? But if you sort of, and I've followed this philosophy sort of throughout my career, maybe knowingly, maybe unknowingly, subconsciously, it's sort of, okay, let's get up today and deal with what today brings. And then tomorrow we'll deal with what tomorrow brings and the day after and so on. And that's not to say that I forget or I'm not afraid of or concerned about the broader implications of like a COVID and boy, when will this thing end? And what are the long-term implications? But at the end of the day, it's Monday morning. You got to get up and deal with Monday. And so that's sort of how I got through it with a lot of help from a lot of very smart, dedicated colleagues.
When I was a kid, I was enrolled in I'm talking maybe 10 years old, 11 years old. I was enrolled in something kind of like a yoga practice that taught us mindfulness. And I never really thought about it ever. I mean, I did it for a couple years and and the mindfulness practice would be something to the effect of, you'd be sitting there and you would be thinking of five things that you could see, five things that you could feel, five thoughts that passed by. And you just repeat that over and over again. And in retrospect, I think it taught me a lot of what you're describing of being able to see a crisis and deal with it and let it pass, let tomorrow come and kind of bring what it may bring. Where do you think that came from for you, that ability to see things in that way?
Probably experience, practice, time. It's never. I had a boss many years ago that would say to me, it's never as bad as you think it is, and it's never as good as you think it is. So keep the perspective, right? It's
Yeah.
sort of. So I think it does come with time. There certainly, 20 years prior to the COVID pandemic, in the early 2000s, as a new executive or a newer executive, I would have probably been more quote unquote freaked out than I was. We also didn't know what it was going to bring, right? In 2020, we just knew, hey, we got to go home. And it took 3 or 4 months to realize, wow, this thing actually kills people. Well, that's really bad. And then there were some silver linings. I'm sure, I experienced them with family being home. It wasn't great with teenage kids, but there were moments of silver lining that you sort of could appreciate maybe more after the fact than in the moment. So I think it really comes down to experience. I'm not, I fake it pretty well in terms of being calm, and for the most part, I am today. But certainly there was inner concerns, and it's like, well, I can't do anything about it, right? So I just got to deal with it. But it's not to say that I was, sort of indifferent or not concerned. I was, but I think it was just at that point I was a pretty experienced executive. I'd seen a lot. I dealt with some prior crises, and had to sort of get on with it.
Yeah. Very interesting. So since then, you've been managing this firm, and as I understand it, you've achieved pretty significant revenue growth on the order of 150%. You've more than doubled EBITDA. This is a time that's been, from the outside, seemingly very challenging for your space. What's that been like? How have you been able to continue growing through this environment?
Yeah. So look, if you've got to seize the opportunity. So we are, as we've said, a global provider of real estate services. We operate similar to three other large firms in the industry, maybe four, depending on the day. And the idea is that we bring a platform to bear when we are dealing with our clients. So we bring research, we bring technology, we bring thought leadership. It's easy, relatively easy to do a small real estate transaction. You've got a broker on the buyer side, a broker on the seller side, landlord and tenant, and you do a transaction, and it can be very commoditized. But the more sophisticated buyers and sellers, landlords and tenants, they want more, and we're in that category of bringing more. But we are the smallest of the big four. I'll call them that for convenience, and we've got an agility and an enterprising culture that is different, I think, than the other three. I was at one prior, so I can comment on that one for sure. We approach life, if you will, work life differently, and it seems to resonate. And so we've had the opportunity of being smaller, and therefore more opportunity to grow, more opportunity to recruit talent, and we've been very focused on talent recruitment, both in the management ranks as well as producers, people who actually go out and broker transactions. And so when you bring smart, good people in, and you don't bat 100, nobody does, but when you bring in a majority of the people that are smart and hardworking, ambitious, creative, the results are exponential if you let them do what you hired them to do. If you don't overmanage them, but you do hold them accountable. I like to say, that everybody can do whatever they want as long as they don't infringe on what someone else wants to do, right? And that's where I come in, and where management comes in to hold people accountable to each other, to the company. And I think we've been very fortunate that has resonated, and it's been exponential. We've added more and more people, both in the management ranks and in the production ranks, and that's the way we grow. That's how you grow. We call it organically. I guess it is acquisition of talent, but we're not buying companies. In a sense, we're either attracting and in some cases buying people. And most of the people that come over, I see them 2 or 3 years later, and they say, "Boy, I don't know what took me so long." It is just a very we've created, not that I've created, but I've carried on, and I've added to the culture that existed here, which is one of of enterprise, of being enterprising and letting people do what they do well.
Okay, so then is that kind of the culture that you promote, that you use to attract people? You let them know that they're going to have the freedom to, and maybe some autonomy to grow in their career with Colliers.
Yeah, very, very much so. It is absolutely a recruiting tool that we use, or a recruiting factor that I think resonates. You don't really know it till you get there, myself included. I remember when I was being recruited, and I was told about the culture, not in relative terms, just in absolute terms, about the culture, the beliefs of our global CEO, who was the global CEO then, still is. This idea of being enterprising, of letting people, do what they do and thrive, while sort of holding them accountable. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, if he's telling what he's saying is half true, this is going to be pretty cool. Well, it was all true. And it wasn't Kool-Aid. It really, for the most part, again, you're not going to bat 100. I don't think everybody in our company believes it, but a lot of people do. The vast majority do. They live it, they see it, they experience it, they get the benefit of it, and then it resonates, right? And the more we grow, the more we're known. for this culture. And I think it is a breath of fresh air for a lot of people who come from other cultures to not be second guessed, to not be managed top down, but to be called out when you do something you shouldn't do, but not in a punitive way, in a, hey, you've got to be more accountable. You can't do that because it hurts something someone else is doing.
I've got a tactical question for you on that because culture is kind of an ill-defined thing at a lot of companies. How do you enforce culture? Do you have, I mean, do you train the executives? Do you train middle managers? Do you send out office memos? What is it? How is it that you promote the culture?
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're saying. So we do talk about our enterprising culture and we try to give examples, right, of how we've been enterprising. But we don't have management training that says this is how you need to be enterprising. We don't really do that. I think it's more in our actions, right? It's more in not coming down on people for something they did, they tried, it didn't work. It's not punitive, right? Boy, you probably shouldn't do that again, is about the most you're gonna, that you're going to, that's the most comment you're going to get. So I think it's how we live, and it's as you're going down the food chain, let's say, so to the level beneath me and the one beneath that, they, I think, for the most part, those people want to be empowered. And so, well, if you want to be empowered, then you need to empower the people under you. And so I think we actually live it. And I know that might sound a little corny, but I actually think we do. Of all the companies I've worked at, this is the first one I see where we live it. That we live the culture, we live the values. We don't study them as much, and we don't train on them as much. It's just what we do. Now, some would say, look, it's the company's getting bigger. You probably should have a few more guardrails. There should be a bit more top down. I think we have a healthy balance, but for the most part, it's about the people being empowered and trusted to do what they do. And I think it's just a matter of living it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I face the same task at my company, but it's a far smaller company. And, from what I do is when I'm introducing a new hire to the company, I read through the company culture. I want them to know before they accept a position what the culture is, and then but once they join, I think it's probably very similar to what you're describing. The only real way, I guess, to really communicate this is through actions. You can talk about it in the lead up to them joining the company, but once they're on, the actions speak louder.
I agree. And I think, look, I don't know that we have them read the culture, but we certainly, our best recruiters, even our moderately good recruiters, those who actually recruit for a living, that's their job, and managers who are recruiting people in, they've lived the culture, so they're qualified to talk about it, and they do. I talk about it when I'm with leadership that we're recruiting and I'm interviewing them. I don't necessarily use the words enterprising, but I talk about how you're empowered. I talk about how we like to see collaboration. And look, we're not perfect at it. Far from. Sitting in my chair, I hear a lot of complaints about so and so said this about somebody else, and this didn't work, or that didn't work, or they weren't a great partner. And my response to that is that then go fix it, right? What are you telling me for? I mean, I'm glad to hear it. Let me advise you how I think you should fix it. That's the culture, right? It's not top down. It's not me going to Johnny and saying you upset Freddie, right? It's Freddie going to Johnny and figuring it out. I often say, and it's not an original thought, I heard this from a prior boss of mine, when someone's having a problem with someone else, I said, look, you're not going anywhere and they're not going anywhere. So the two of you got to figure it out. It's that kind of thing that I think, promotes what we call culture.
I was laughing as you were describing that because that sounds so familiar to me. Having people come in, they're unhappy, they're saying that the culture isn't being adhered to, perhaps, or they're describing a situation. And I had to learn the hard way that I can't solve those interpersonal issues. They have to solve them. If they solve them, then the culture can be enforced and can take shape. But if the CEO steps in, then it becomes a CEO driven culture where the CEO solves problems and no matter how big and small, and that turns into the culture.
Yeah, look, I agree. And you want a certain degree of that, right? So I think having been here now in the CEO seat, going on 6, 7 years, um, I do, by definition, I do influence the culture, right? And I'm sure I'm defining some of the culture. Hopefully, not all of it. I know it's not all of it. I mean, I try hard not to do that, but people know my style, know my expectations. At least those closest to me, or 2 degrees of separation, and then it gets talked about. Well, Gil won't like this, or that's just human nature, right? So definitely, I have some influence on how we behave, right? And it's because today I sit in the chair. If I don't sit in the chair tomorrow, someone else will sit in the chair and they'll influence the culture. It's just sort of, the way it works. But then what I also find is maybe not to influence culture, although I'm sure it does this, is when I don't go and solve a problem, but I coach somebody in how to solve it. Of course, I'm bringing my perspective to them, which is years of experience, probably more years of experience than they have. So that counts for something, and I'm imparting my knowledge to them on how they should go about solving something, right? The example I gave, well, neither of you are going anywhere, so you better figure it out. The other one I use a lot is, look, if that's how you see the world, and you're not wrong, but you have to be open-minded that someone else sees the world different. It's just the way it is, right? We're not all built the same way. If we were, a lot of the creative things that we discover, we probably wouldn't discover, right? Because different people think differently, and excel at different things and approach things differently. And just because someone doesn't meet your moral standard doesn't mean they're a bad person. They might have some growth to do. We might agree that that person wasn't as ethical as they should have been, but let's you got to work with them, and you can impart what you think, and maybe they'll get better by your standards, and maybe they won't. But I bet you if you ask them, they've got some thoughts about you that you didn't have about yourself, right? So that's how I try to sort of make everybody get along, or try to make everybody get along.
So let's talk a little bit about the changes that we've seen in real estate lately in the past few years. Yeah, so we've seen shifts in with remote work, hybrid offices. There's now economic uncertainty. How do you navigate this type of disruption?
Yeah, so I'll go back to something I said earlier, right? Which is you sort of take it day by day. I read a lot, a lot of industry publications to try to keep up to speed with what's going on, and to try to um, get different perspectives. Then I sound smarter, right? But I take it all and then try to sort of, you know, uh, make it my own, not to steal it, but to sort of help me, come up with my own thoughts. But yes, look, it's been a tough time. The last 5 years with Office, which was it's a major part of what we do, and the transformation into remote, what was potentially going to be, all remote work.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that didn't happen, and I didn't think it would, because look, at the end of the day, we need each other. People need
Yeah.
people to build culture, to collaborate, to learn. So I think what we've evolved to, finally, Office is healthy again, or relatively healthy, but it's taken 5 years. We knew it would take a long time. I don't think we knew it would take 5 years. But if talking today, the office market is healthy and getting healthier,
Okay.
and we've evolved. But to think that it's the office of 2019 is also a misnomer, right? We're not back to 19. We never will get back to 19. And I don't think, at some point, we should have realized that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to get people back into the office the majority of the time, for all of the benefits that are out there, including culture and mentorship and collaboration and all that. And I think we're there. No longer are people in the office, strictly 8 to 5, 8 to 6, with a half hour or an hour for lunch every day of the week, like clockwork. It's not how it works. And naturally, Mondays and Fridays are quieter because, it's a long weekend. People like to work at home potentially on a Monday. But for the most part, and not everybody, but for the most part, I think you see people generally back for some majority portion of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There are exceptions because people were hired as remote workers during the pandemic, and those agreements are being honored. But in a lot of places, we are back to, for the most part, what it was pre-pandemic. So that's really good to see. After the surge in 21, 22, the surge in economic activity, which we saw as a result of the government, support to the economy. It surged, and then inflation went up, and then interest rates went up, and then the economy slowed. The natural cycle. We've had pretty stable, not down. We Colliers U.S. have experienced pretty stable earnings for all of those 3 years. Now, some people were not as fortunate. We put cost measures in place. They weren't popular to begin with, obviously. But we've stayed pretty flat, which I think is an accomplishment. Now we're poised for growth as the economy starts to improve. And I do think it's improving. I think it has been for the last number of months, and I think it's going to continue. So we should reap the benefits of that. But
Yeah.
but we were prudent early on. With the cost actions that we took. Of course, I talk about them as something factual, but it affects obviously human lives and human incomes. There's all that certainly to consider. So you have to do that to survive as a company. And statistically speaking, if it impacts you, it's not great. But from a numbers standpoint, you have to pair the workforce in order to go forward and try to be as profitable as you can be. So not pleasant,
Yeah.
but I think it's safe to say at this point we got through it, and we're looking for growth and more success.
Yeah. Yeah. So, from my perspective, and I'm just curious your opinion on this, but my perspective, I think where we've gotten today is fairly positive. We have some more flexibility. Like you said, it's not 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for every industry. Maybe some industries do require that still in person, but for industries that don't require that, there's more flexibility, which potentially can lead to a different type of work-life balance. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that do you see some positives out of this?
I do, and I see them, personally. The truth of the matter is, I'm not sure that I ever went to the office regularly on a Friday. Years ago, pre-pandemic, I worked downtown LA. Anybody who knows LA knows that coming home on a Friday night from downtown is about an hour and a half to the San Fernando Valley where I live, which is a complete waste of time, right? It really is. So I would either leave early on a Friday or not go in. Now, if there's a need to be in a big meeting or a podcast or something you're doing that requires you to be in the office, of course I would go in. But for many years, I was not going in on a Friday, and it was just more efficient. And I was working a full day, but I was working from home, and that wasn't always easy to do at the beginning of the decade when you had to dial in to go online. At the beginning of the century, you had to go on, you had to dial in, or the network went down, or it wasn't as efficient, or you didn't scan, you needed to fax. All that made it a lot harder, and there was a lot more reason to be in the office. But today you can more or less replicate at home what you have in the office. Not exactly, but more or less. So even more reason to work at home on Friday. And again, I probably come in 1 or 2 Fridays a month and work from home, 2 or 3 Fridays a month. And so for me, it's been very efficient. I'm in Monday through Friday. I don't rush in for 8:30 the way I used to 10, 15 years ago, but I am in by 9, let's say, most days. But it does de-stress, because if I'm not until 11 because I have a reason, nobody's looking at me the way they might have, 15, 20, why is he late? And people do look. People want to, it's just human nature. You don't feel that pressure. I don't feel that pressure. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'm still very, conscious, being the leader of the organization, what people are watching, what they're observing, what they're concluding. And you don't have that as much. And I think I work hard. I work on weekends if I have to catch up. That's almost a given every weekend. But the key for me, and I think for a lot of people, is I have pretty much total flexibility.
Yeah.
So I'm putting in the hours, but I'm putting them in when it's most convenient for me. Not when it's most convenient for the social norms. And that's made a tremendous difference to me. It may be that, not everybody can do that. You have a line job. You have, several bosses that want you in that's different. I'm at a point in my career where I can speak for myself and say it has made a difference in just how I feel about, work. And again, I don't mind working long hours. I do that, but to do it for the most part, on my own terms, that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think, being able to come in on your own terms doesn't really change the fact that you're going to have to work long hours at times, no question. But to remove what sometimes might feel like the arbitrary nature of the hours that requirement. I think that's a big help for executives that are working, that are by definition are going to be working really a long, a large part of their week.
I agree. And I'd also say, look, if you think about what I'll call quote unquote the rank and file, the person just starting out, the mid-level manager, whatever it might be, there's this idea, that these folks need to be supervised. It's countercultural for us at Colliers, but that they need to be supervised because then they'll be more productive. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got news for you. If somebody's productive and hardworking and ambitious, they're going to do that on an airplane. They're going to do that at home. They're going to do that at Starbucks, and they're going to do it in the office. And if they're not going to do it anywhere. And you know who they are.
I agree with that completely. I agree with that completely. So, if I'm not mistaken, I think you started your career as a CPA. Is that
I
right?
did. I
I-
did.
Is that a good background for someone who wants to be a CEO?
Look, I'm biased, but I think it is. I know it's a good background for anybody who wants to be in finance. And there is a whole debate that we can get into about, finance people transitioning into operations and ultimately the CEO seat and how often that happens. I think it happens more often than people like to admit, or more often than people think. But I always found the people that were doing our strat planning or that were doing our financial analysis that were CPAs were better at it than the ones that were not. Not to say that the ones that were not were bad, but there was a deeper understanding of the numbers from the people that understood actual numbers. And in fact, I'll just say it. I'll go out there and put my CPA. I'll shine it bright, right? That knew the debits and credits, that understood how the numbers worked. They had a deeper understanding of how the actuals worked, and they could do, in my mind, they could do better financial forecasting and budgeting and that sort of thing. So I do think it's invaluable. The reason I got into it was, my brother was an accountant, and my father said to me, I don't know where your career is going to take you, but you can always do tax returns. Little did he know, I never did a tax return, barely did my own, right? I was in the audit practice. But that's how he thought about it. It was stable, it was secure, it was a pathway after college, it was structure, lots of smart young people working together. It was great. It was a great way to start, and I didn't have to. I got a job, and that was that. It put me on a path, right? I didn't have to think too much about getting a job and what would it look like and what did I want to do. It set me on a path. So I do think it is helpful, and I think it is. It is. I turn back to it, right, all the time. Even now, as CEO, I've got a deep understanding of finance. I have to be able to do all of the other things that come along with being CEO, being visionary, and maybe I'm not as visionary as some CEOs, not as much of a dreamer or a strategist as some CEOs. That's how I would categorize myself, as strategic enough, but not necessarily a strategic thinker. I'm more tactical, problem solving. How do we solve something today and get better at it so we do better at it tomorrow? And I think a lot of that goes back to my finance background.
What's the role that mentorship has played in your career and maybe in the way you run Colliers?
Yeah, so I've observed a lot of leaders, a lot of very powerful leaders, powerful either because they were well-to-do or because they controlled a vast empire, if you will, a big business or businesses, that sort of thing. I think each of those were mentors to me. I don't know that I ever had a formal mentor, but we didn't have that I can recall, mentorship programs like we do today. But yes, that they have an influence both on what to do and what not to do. And sometimes it's just humorous, right? I've had some mentors that were quite difficult. One in particular that I can think of was a very well-to-do person that was a very difficult individual. But what I learned from him and the laughs I got out of it, most people I think would have been intimidated. I was not smart enough, I don't think, to be intimidated by the guy. I found him quite humorous. And he was smart as a whip. And he was just a human being at the end of the day. And I learned a lot from him early on, right? Mostly what to do, some things what not to do, perhaps. just socially unacceptable, or really just too tough on someone starting up. But it never fazed me, and I absorbed it like a sponge. But I find myself quoting, mostly my mentors were former bosses, right? Mostly all my current bosses. And, I find myself quoting them. So that means they had an impact, right? And right, because I do find myself saying, well, so-and-so used to say, and I'm like, oh my God, there I'm quoting them. But actually it had an impact, and I do it. I do what they did. So that's mostly where it's come from, and it's invaluable. But I guess the point I want to make is it doesn't have to be formal to be beneficial the way it is today. A lot of these programs are formalized today,
Yeah.
and it's I've been a mentor to people in a formal way, sometimes informal, and I've been fairly deliberate about it. I think the people that were mentors to me, if you ask them, "Hey, did you mentor Gil?" They might say no, but they did.
Hmm.
That they all along I was absorbing and watching, and sometimes saying, my God, I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. And today I do some of that, right? Because they prepared me for this.
I think that's a great point. I don't know if people realize that it doesn't have to be as formal as it sounds. When you hear about a mentor or protege, you do really think of something that is a little formal. At least I think that is what I think of. But really, a lot of relationships take on those characteristics without any formality.
I wish I would have known what I just said, right? Because I stumbled upon it, right? Nobody told me, gee, listen and learn from people that have come before you that are successful. Take the good, and maybe not the bad, if you want to phrase it in that vernacular, right? Nobody ever told me that. If someone would have said to me, look, listen to everybody, right? But mostly listen to your bosses. They've traveled the path that you're about to travel. That would have been good advice to have, right? So hopefully people listening will take that advice and say, just listen, watch, observe the good, the bad, the not so good, the very good, and then form your own opinions, right? Take from it what you want to take to help yourself be a better leader, a better person, and so on. But yes, they can be informal, and the key is to take advantage of everything you're observing, for people senior to you, right? To take as much as you can, and morph it into your own version.
Yeah. So lately, I've been asking all CEOs that I talk to, how have you been using AI, both in your business and maybe in your personal life?
Yeah, so I'm embarrassed to say I'm not an early adopter, and by the sake of any technology, and people that know me will chuckle, will chuckle knowingly, but I'm not blind to it, right, at all. I will get into AI. It's intimidating for me. I'm not. It's not natural to me, right?
No.
But I've been quoted as saying, to because I don't think we've adopted it as fast as we could have in Colliers, to be
Okay.
honest. But the question is, what are we adopting, right? So you can
Yeah.
spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and what is this thing? Well, if you ignore it, it's like ignoring the internet, right? It's that big. And maybe even bigger because of the pace at which it's developing, and the quality. But I am observing, and I am listening, and I'm being encouraged by some of the people around me to start using it. Somebody told me the other day, one of our people said there was a detailed report that we had, and the guy reports to me directly, said he used AI to summarize the report. He had to tweak it, he had to edit a little bit, but he used AI to summarize the report and put it into an executive summary for me that he would have done manually historically, right?
Yeah.
And it saved them hours, absolutely hours. So you sort of can't ignore it. You can't, we
Yeah.
can't live without it and be competitive. So that much I know. We're starting to use it in lease abstraction. What took people hours to do,
Hmm.
it can abstract a lease. It has to be quality control, because at the end of the day, it is a machine. But the way I equate it is, it can't do anything more than we as humans can do. It really can't, right? Because we're still the boss of it, right? So it can't do anything but it can do it so much faster, because it's programmed to scan everything that's out there that we would have to read, right? And we just can't read as fast as the machine. So we've actually found a technology, right, that we can use, we can utilize, we can take advantage of, right? But we still control it. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's I will be using it, whether it's tomorrow, a week from now, months from now. I will start to use it for my own purposes. In the meantime, I'm observing what people are doing and what they're telling me, and it's incredible, right? It's absolutely powerful.
Yeah.
Still got to be perfected. There's security issues with it that we're dealing
Yeah.
with. We're using a particular chat GPT called Copilot, which part of the Microsoft suite, because we're a Microsoft shop. So it comes with the security that we need. Now, that's not to say we're not allowing people to use chat GPT, but we're sort of discouraging it because they can upload anything. And, by even inadvertently, they can upload private client information, right? Then we got to
Right.
try to figure out how to pull it down. All of this is very new, and we're learning it sort of as we're flying the plane. But it is going to change the way we work. It is going to cost jobs. I don't worry about that too much because I know, like anything else, it reverts to the mean. So what I mean by that is, yes, some jobs will go away, but others I do believe will be created, and people will reskill. It'll take time, and it'll be bumpy, and it won't necessarily be pleasant for a little while. But I think 3-4 years from now, the society will adapt.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know that we've gotten to the phase where jobs are being lost yet, and I would assume that some jobs will be lost. I think where we are, from my perspective, is we're in the efficiency phase where we're discovering things like you just described, where somebody takes a task that would have taken them several hours to do. They use something like ChatGPT and it's done in a few minutes. They do quality control. And so then the question is what does that executive do with the rest of their time? How do they take that time back? They've got, several hours to now think more deeply about some other topic or to do another task. And that is a pretty exciting possibility.
I agree with you. I think we are in the efficiency phase, and I think we don't know what's yet to come exactly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly what it'll be. Um, but you're right. I think smart people are going to be more efficient, and then they're going to use that time more judiciously. I think what happens is everything just moves faster, right? So if you think back, I'll make this equivalent. If you think back to the days when we couldn't even fax, we used couriers. And I can remember back in the day, couriers on bicycles picking up packages at our accounting offices and taking them over to the legal offices or the client on bikes, because everybody was downtown in those days. And then came the fax machine, which was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then that came on that funny paper, hard to read. It would smudge if you held it wrong. And then you went to the scan, and then I learned to scan, right? And that was a big deal, right? But I didn't have to ask an assistant. The way I learned that was it was 5:15 one day, and I needed to scan something. There was nobody to scan it, so I think I asked one of the junior people, "Hey, show me how to scan." Now I can scan myself, right? It's fairly easy. But it wasn't to begin with, right? It was an
It
intimidating task.
wasn't.
How does this
Yeah.
machine work? So I think
I
we've
remember that.
experienced it before, and this one might be faster and smarter and more intimidating.
Yes.
But I think we've experienced these types of transformations before, and we'll deal with it. But you're right. We're just at the tip of the iceberg.
I like how you brought me back to that. I remember my first internship. I remember it was at a public relations firm on K Street
You
in
see.
DC. Yeah, and I remember there were couriers on bicycles. There were, now granted, this was the tail end of it. There were already apparently fewer of them, but now I would be very surprised to see one.
I'm older than you, right? So I experienced all of it, the thick of it, right? Maybe toward the end, but there was a lot of them hanging out under the trees downtown LA waiting for the call, right? Or the page in those days, because I don't think they had cell phones. So
Ah,
it would be page, then you go one law firm to another, whatever it might be. But there was a certain quaintness to it, a certain human touch to it, right? That today you just send it over the computer, which is
yeah.
a way more efficient. As a result, I think we're all more productive, right? We get more done in a day.
Yeah, no question at all. There is disruption though, and I'm sure that the same thing will happen with AI tools. And it's anyone's guess how quickly, but I will agree with you that I think the speed of the disruption appears to be moving faster than with previous technologies, including the internet. And I think that's because it's powered by the internet. It's powered by technology that has been perfected over the last 2 decades. And so version one of ChatGPT blew us away in a lot of ways. And now we're, I think, on version 5. We'll probably be on version 6 very soon. It's remarkable how quickly it is progressing.
I completely agree. That is a little intimidating, especially for
Yeah.
someone like me, right? That's been working for 30 plus years, right? Again, it's not native in any way. It's all learned behavior. I mean, I know it's good, but it is the speed at which it's moving is very intimidating. I completely agree with that.
So I think this is a good segue into another question, which I think this might be tough to answer, but do you think that the qualities required to be a CEO today are different than they would have been 20, 30 years ago?
That is a hard question to answer. I think perhaps, but I think the core responsibilities or the core qualities are still the same, right? So what are those? Just if I enumerate them, you got to be smarter than the average bear, right? Because you've got to think strategically and you've got to try to think one step ahead. And you've got to, when you've got to react, you've got to, you've also got to be thinking pretty, you get one shot sometimes to remedy a situation. So you have to have, deep analytical skills and instincts. And I think, technology is not going to do that for you, right? It's just not. It might help you research something quickly, but it's not going to give you those inherent skills. So that probably has been the same since time immemorial. The other thing that's probably critically important is you've got to be able to have a genuineness that helps build relationships, right? Because when situations do get tough, and they do, most of what hits my desk, most of what hits most CEOs' desks, for the most part, it's difficult tasks, right? They are challenging tasks. There's something others haven't been able to figure out, or they have figured it out and they need an opinion, or it's controversial, or it's brand threatening, any and all of those, right? That's what hits the desk. And so you can be very tired at the end of the day with having done very little just because of the intellectual focus that you need. So I think that probably hasn't changed and won't change in terms of, when you have relationships, you can deliver bad news more easily. We're not going to do what you said. We're going to do what so and so said, and here's why. Always, I think a skill set of a CEO, a good CEO, is going to tell the parties why we're doing what we're doing. So I think dealing with different generations maybe is more challenging, as CEOs often tend to be of the older generation. It takes a while to get there. Then you've got to understand how the younger generation thinks. To dismiss an entire generation is probably not a good thing. Right? Like, you've got to appreciate a generation for what they are. You can't say all millennials are lazy, because they're not. They work differently. You almost have to be, I try to be open-minded to maybe learn a thing or two from them. I do learn from our younger people. I do learn how they think. They're very smart. A lot of them are very smart, very agile. They use technology in a different way. They can impart knowledge to me quicker than I can learn it. So I try to keep an open mind. And I think all of us CEOs, you have some very young CEOs that have accomplished a lot in a short time. But most of us, I think, are a different generation than the people that work for us, or a lot of the people that work for us. And we have to adapt and try to take the best out of each generation and not generalize. So I don't know that, the truth be told, that the basic or core skills to be a successful CEO have actually changed that much.
Yeah. Yeah, that rings true to me as well. I will say, you mentioned the younger generation, Gen Z, and I did a little coaching on a high school team. It was a high school wrestling team, and I noticed in the 20 years since I was on a high school wrestling team, there is kind of the average wrestler has stayed very similar. The average new wrestler, that is. The elite wrestlers have grown tremendously. They would be unrecognizable to the rest of us 20 years ago, because they use tools that weren't available back then. They use YouTube to watch Olympic gold medalists. They use YouTube to learn. They use other social media to share ideas, and their skills grow in ways that we could never have hoped for back then. And I think that is, I'm sure that we're going to see that trend beyond just high school wrestling. I'm sure it's not isolated just to that. I think that we will see this top 10% or whatever it is, top 20%, maybe. I mean, the bigger the better, but there's going to be a group of highly motivated members of the Gen Z generation that are going to utilize this technology in ways that we can't even imagine right now.
So fair point, and I agree, right? It makes all the sense in the world. I'll say this: as long as they're utilizing that technology for an ends, right? To take it and be better, because the basic the fundamental skills of ambition, getting stuff done, right? Those are all important, and the fluff, personally, I could do without, right?
Agreed.
So if you're using it as a means to a better end, right? As a means, and in the case that you're quoting, they are, right? I agree with you that they will. They're utilizing a tool to make themselves exponentially better, right? And so
Yeah.
that's how they're going to be the top 10% that maybe we didn't have to do because there was no competition because the technology
That's
didn't
right. That's
exist.
a good point. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and I think that there is a flip side to that where the time wasting opportunities are probably overwhelming for unfocused people. And I think I think the kids that I'm referring to are the ones who have a vision for their future. They have ideas for what they want to accomplish. They're highly focused. Without that, I think that is the world we live in today is scary because you've got, you don't have 10 paths that you could go down. You've got 10,000 paths you could go down, and many of them are probably not good paths. And so if you lack that vision or that focus, I think it is probably an overwhelming time for a lot of people.
I think that's true. I see it in my own kids, right? There's so many choices.
Yeah,
I was given one, go be an accountant, right? So and it didn't work out too bad, right? But in a way it was better because I knew and I didn't have to consider,
yeah,
so and so's considering this. Fine, good for you, but I'm doing this, right? And it was pretty cut and dry. Not that it was demanded, but it was a good path to be on, and it made it easy. And at 22 years old, you need easy, right? I often coach people and I say, I never, I never planned out 5 years. I never had a 5-year plan for my career or my personal growth or anything like that. I just think I'll mention this because it's a good segue, right? Because you can get overwhelmed with all of the choices, and even more so today. That's not to say I didn't think about the next thing, but I always thought to work hard, be informed, work harder and be more informed than the next person, not from a competition standpoint, but just for myself, right? To be prepared to do well and do well in the job that you're in. And oftentimes that gets recognized and leads to the next thing. Not always. And then you've got to think about that, right? If you have a boss that is holding you back, you got to think about that.
yeah,
And you certainly have to consider it. And maybe you could take your skills and your hard work and do it where you're going to be better recognized. That's happened to me on more than one occasion. But to think and dream about the future and not do the best that you can in the present, right, is probably not a path to success.
yeah. So I think we've gone through the questions that I wanted to talk to you about. What's next for Colliers? What did I leave out any topics that you wanted to talk about today?
I appreciate that. Look, for Colliers, I think that we've at this point in the U.S. and the U.S. business for Colliers was always a little bit behind Europe and Asia. They were more mature businesses when they were acquired by the company that acquired us. They were it was more franchised in the U.S. than elsewhere. And today, most of it is owned, and so there's more consistency in that type of thing. So we've certainly caught up, and we've caught up to what I'll define as the best in the business in my mind, the ones who do this for the most sophisticated players and who do it well. So what's next? Well, there's still gaps in our platform because we are the smallest. There's still room for good talent to be brought in and to grow. And that's a good thing because some companies, of course, are wondering what to do to grow. What do I do with my cash? How do I invest? We don't have that problem in Colliers in the US. So we can continue to build on something. And fortunately for us now, we can build on something that's a lot more reputable than it was 5-7 years ago because of the successes that we've had. And again, it's not a magic formula. It's not AI. It's just basic blocking and tackling, bringing good people on, retaining them when they leave for whatever reason, to go and our turnover rates are not that high because of the culture we talked about earlier. But when they leave, replace them with good people that are motivated to keep going on the path. And to maintain this culture that obviously has done well for us, there's no need to change it. We've got to keep capitalizing on it in creative ways. And keep growing. It is a growth story, and it is our lifeblood to grow. So we've got to keep doing that. There's no magic or nothing that we necessarily have to do that's different than we've been doing. But we've got got to be hyper focused on it. You take your eye off the ball for a moment, and you fall backwards. From a corporation standpoint, what we've done that's not part of my business, but ancillary to, is we really have diversified. We didn't have 7, 8 years ago, we didn't have an investment management business. You mentioned the 100 billion under management. We didn't have that. That's an ancillary and synergistic business to our commercial real estate services business. And we didn't have an engineering business. And now we've got a really large one, right? It fits. It fits with what we do. It's not a direct fit, but it is ancillary. Again, we have similar clients in our engineering business to our brokerage business. And so we've diversified and branched out into more recurring revenues, which are important as a public company, but also if you want to provide clients with a wide spectrum of services. So at a level above me, strategically, the corporation has diversified in a way that I think is going to stand us in really good stead, because it is broader with more recurring revenue, more recurring clients that can only benefit us. So I love where we sit. I do still love my job. It does still come with challenges every day and satisfaction. And I guess that's what keeps me going. And if this were the last job I had, that would be fine with me. But I'm not near being done at all. But if it were to come to the end, I would say that, I would feel very fulfilled.
Gil, thank you so much for joining us on Road to CEO. This has been a great episode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.